Hi, I'm Michelle Isom, and I'm currently the board chair. In 1985, the Minnesota Commission for the Hearing Impaired, MCHI, was established. In 1993, the name was changed to Minnesota Commission Serving Deaf and Hard of Hearing People. In 2008, the name was changed again to the Commission of Deaf, Deafblind, and Hard of Hearing Minnesotans. And finally, in 2018, the name was changed to our current name, the Minnesota Commission of the Deaf, Deafblind, and Hard of Hearing. Most people call us the Commission or MNCDHH.
Hello, I'm Dr. Darlene Zangara, the current Executive Director. The Commission was created so that we could lobby for public policy and find solutions to barriers experienced by people who are deaf, deafblind, and hard of hearing. As Dwight Maxa explained in his 2011 oral visual history interview, the Commission identifies the needs, does the research to support it, writes the legislation so it can pass, and lobbies the legislators and educates the community. Here are some memories from past board members and chairs from the last 36 years.
Hello, my name is Kim Wassenaar. I have been involved with the commission since 2003. From the years 2003 to 2009, I was heavily involved. And my best memory was that it was just such a wonderful group. It was great to learn about the leadership structure, about how bills became laws within the legislature, in the Senate, and there were so many things that I learned about that I was unaware of previous to my engagement. At the time, we had 9 bills, and when they all passed, we referred to it as Cloud 9. We had all of our initiatives that passed. And Mary Hartman at the time asked me to MC the ceremony that we had that year, and it was a big, important event. And we decided to sing Cloud 9 by the Temptations. It reminded me of that group, the Temptations, if you're familiar. And so we sang Cloud 9, to be what you want to be on Cloud 9, no responsibility on Cloud 9. But unfortunately, during that performance, the button on my pants fell off. And so I had to make sure that I could keep my pants on while I was still on stage. I managed to do so, thankfully, which was quite a relief, but it was a wonderful ceremony, and I'll never forget that evening. Just a wonderful memory of my participation within the commission.
Hello, I am Monique Hammond. I served on the board of the Commission for Deaf, Deafblind, and Hard of Hearing Minnesotans from 2006 to 2012, and I count myself among those who are hard of hearing. Now, my 6 years with the MNCDHH became years of intensive learning, and so it is in that spirit that I'd like to share some of my memories with you. Now, when I first joined the MNCDHH, we still had intense discussions about an important piece of legislation called the EHDI, the Early Hearing Detection and Intervention for Newborn Babies, which of course is so important for the children, but also for their parents and for their families. And so I will never forget the day of joy in 2007 when this legislation passed. But I will also never forget that this became for me a turnaround day, because I began to understand that public policy changes when people take action and they see that action through. Now, I'd also like to touch very briefly on two other important initiatives that arose during my time with the MNCDHH, and today I am still proud of having been involved in some way in their creation. Initiative number one is Lobby Day. This day when we come to the Capitol in St. Paul in person or virtually, as we are doing this year, to celebrate this day of empowerment for people who are deaf, blind, and hard of hearing in Minnesota. And we come to connect and to learn, but also, if we wish to do so, to make our cases with our own legislators. But how does one do such a case convincingly? And recognizing such potential shortcomings then led to initiative number two, namely the creation of a class called Making Your Case. And it is online and it is free. And here people learn about the importance of defining their case, the importance of concise messaging, of advocacy, and also they learn the basics of public policy. And so I encourage all of those who haven't done so already to go online and to get to the website and to click on Making Your Case and get started. Because what is it that you might be wanting to change? And today is a very good day for asking yourselves that question. Because in the end, there are two sides. On one side, there we are, the stakeholders, the people who want change and who advocate for change. And on the other side, there are the legislators, the people who can make change happen, and to whom, of course, we are making our cases so effectively. But in between those two sides, there seems to be this gap that is so overwhelming and scary, because how are we even supposed to be doing anything in the first place? But we are not alone. And this is where, in my mind, the MNCDHH comes in. As a filter for our case. Do we even have a case? And then also for giving our case context. And as a source of information, of guidance, of advocacy, and yes, as a source of authority and power. And so today we thank the MNCDHH for 36 years of working with us and for having the backs of those people who are deaf, blind, and hard of hearing in Minnesota. And so here is to you, MNCDHH. Happy anniversary and happy birthday.
My name is Jeff Moen. I was born deaf in the right ear. I lost the hearing in the left ear later in life from a tumor and surgery. Gave me 20 plus years of being totally deaf. I now have a cochlear implant in the right ear, and that's what I'm working with today. I was introduced to the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services and the Northeast Regional Advisory Committee in the early 90s. Since then, it was with great fortune that I could serve 6 3-year terms on the advisory committee and 2 3-year terms on the Minnesota Commission of the Deaf, Blind, and Hard of Hearing. During this time, I met more wonderful, talented people who helped shape this 20 plus year journey than I could possibly name. I would like to name 3 from our local Northeast region that helped and supported me immensely. They are Carol Merman, Cindy Otto, and Sue Kirk. I have great thanks for that. It was an honor to be involved with the commission. and be part of a great team that worked on legislative issues, such as acoustics and loop systems in new schools, getting longer trial times prior to hearing aid purchases, ensuring educational interpreters for children were certified and qualified, getting hospitals to provide mandatory hearing screening at birth. There were many other issues, but these are ones that seem to be on the top of my head. I'm also very pleased and proud that I was part of the hiring team and process that hired Mary Hartnett, who served for many years as the executive director. The advisory committee and the commission also had very wonderful and positive impact on me personally. In the early 90s, it can be honestly stated that I was a totally deaf person with little confidence and didn't feel my voice was heard. With the experience and help of all the wonderful people I met and worked with, it was possible for me to learn new skills, which led to becoming elected chairperson on both the AC and the State Commission. Those skills taught me to be an advocate, to communicate with individuals, with groups, to speak publicly, and eventually gave me confidence to lead and stand in front of a congregation, share sermons and messages. These were things I never imagined to be possible. Overall, I think it's very impressive the positive impact this organization has and hopefully will continue to have on the deaf, blind, and hard of hearing in Minnesota. I'm very delighted and proud and fortunate to have played a small part in this. And I thank you very, very much.
How I get affiliated with the Minnesota Commission of the Deaf, Blind, and Hard of Hearing and celebrating its 36th anniversary. I have been affiliated with the Minnesota Commission of the Deaf, Blind, and Hard of Hearing for over 10 years. When I met with my friend Mario Bauer from the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services, who introduced me to the former executive director, Mary Hartnett, who spent all of her career years working and advocating for the deaf, blind, and hard of hearing Minnesotans. I was appointed by Governor Dayton to be a board member about 4 years ago, and I continue to serve in the board and many subcommittees, and I lead the recruitment and training committee. About my advocacy for people with disabilities and race minority groups, and my concentration on employment first. I label myself as a long-time dedicated advocate for people with disabilities and an equity activist. Besides serving in the Minnesota Commission of the Deaf, Blind, and Hard of Hearing, I am also serving in many other boards and councils, to include the Minnesota Statewide Independent Living Council, Equity Council, and Workforce Innovation Board of Ramsey County, Minnesota Quality Council, and many more. In my public servant role, I contribute to promoting equity and improve the quality of life for all minority communities to enable community integration, economic independence, and independent living. I do believe that employment is the most important quality of life measure for people with disabilities. And I'm a fan and a strong supporter of the employment first movement. When I talk about employment first, I mean it from both the workforce demographics and the quality of employment concept. I hope to see employed people with disabilities getting the job of their dreams, receiving adequate accommodation that helps them perform their job successfully, and not being underemployed, underpaid, working below their competencies, or being overlooked on career growth and development opportunities. What I hope to accomplish for our fellow Minnesotans with disabilities in general, and the deaf and hard of hearing community in particular, that we need to continue working together on the improvement of life of people with disabilities and to have affordable access to assistive technology for deaf, blind, and hard of hearing Minnesotans. Overcome employment barriers and increase employment levels. Improve the workforce quality for workers with disabilities who are underemployed, underpaid, working below their competency, or are exposed to high turnover or unemployment rate. Transforming from anti-discrimination policy into a more affirmative action policy. Student loan repayment and forgiveness program for people with disabilities. Ending all forms of segregated employment. A narrow tailoring strategy and a non-competitive hiring authority to help increase the number of people with disabilities in the labor force in all sectors. More, larger, and continuous tax credit for employer hiring people with disabilities. And finally, employer and government agencies need to come to speak a common language. The need for innovative strategies to improve the outcome for deaf and hard of hearing people. I continue to work with the current executive director, Dr. Darlene Jangara, and her team in finding and implementing new and innovative strategies to improve the outcome for deaf, blind, and hard of hearing people. Dr. Jangara started a series of community engagement through traveling to communities across the state, and we collaborate to advocate for our community tirelessly. It is my hope to see more accessibility for deaf, blind, and hard of hearing people in airport, in flight, and in other means of transportation. I also look forward to advocating for innovative, reasonable accommodation for people with speech impairment and people who encounter APD that's correlated with and resulted from their hearing loss. Happy 36th birthday to the Minnesota Commission of the Deaf, Blind, and Hard of Hearing. Thank you.
It takes a village of data to reveal the larger story. I was at the Minnesota Government IT Symposium. I was there to understand their model and learn how a tract on IT accessibility could be added next year. The emphasis was on data. They even collected paper surveys at the end of each session. I smiled. I was expecting more modern technology accessibility barriers. I shook my head, made a mental note, and went to other workshops. I went to a workshop from the Minnesota Demographer's Office on Minnesota's population and IT. I bumped into Colleen Wick, Executive Director of Minnesota Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities. I told her that there are no statistics on people with disabilities in Minnesota who use the internet or computers. Do they even see us? she found Mary Hartnett. Colleen started by doing a survey the very next day. This is only a little part of the journey to the Minnesota Government IT Accessibility Bill. Ultimately, many other data would be used as well. We created that track or set of sessions on technology accessibility. I was a presenter.
Hello, my name is Jason Valentine. You can call me JV. I was a commission member for over 8 years. I was the chairperson for 6 years. I have wonderful memories working with the commission, and one in specific was Lobby Day. I loved Lobby Day. Everybody coming to visit, the students, the adults, working with over 400 appointments with legislatures, making sure that the community knew that our deaf, blind, and hard of hearing community was seen, and making sure that folks knew that hearing loss was a public issue. Visiting and passing so many bills, improving the betterment and access for our deaf, blind, hard of hearing community. It's wonderful memories working with the commission. I learned so much. It was a wonderful experience.
Hello, I am Shireen Rawlinson Roberts. I used to serve on the Commission of Deaf, Blind, and Hard of Hearing a long time ago. I want to say that was 1999 to about 2001, if I recall correctly. Jesse Ventura, the actor, was elected governor of Minnesota at that time. And truly, that was a surprise. Mike Cashman was the director of the commission. I believe I remember Bruce Hodak and Alice Labar were the director and assistant director of DHHSD. I remember about that time when I served on the commission, there was a lot of camaraderie among the commissioners. We had a commitment to improving accessibility and equality for Minnesotans who are deaf and hard of hearing and deafblind. I was always impressed by how we would all work together, from the agencies, DHHSD, and DEAF, Deafness Education and Advocacy Foundation, as well as MFBHS, the Minnesota Foundation for Better Hearing and Speech. As well as schools would be involved. MSAD, Metro Deaf School, as well as people from our mainstream programs. We all work together to recognize any issues or problems that were happening in the community. After that, we brought the information to the commission and agreed to support those causes. At the same time, we commissioned some legislators to be involved to get bills passed. We would go and testify in the legislature for different bills about those that we opposed or also agreed with. At the time, we just worked together and it was fantastic. I really enjoyed my time in the commission with the state, with all of the state agencies, even though I've worked with other state agencies across the United States, Minnesota has always been the best.
Hello, 36 years. Wow. Congratulations to the commission on your anniversary. In looking back, I deeply value my time in the early 2000s, 20 years ago, when I served on the commission as a board member at large. I also served as the commission chair at that time. During that time, I was working as a program coordinator for the Minnesota Employment Center, often referred to as MEC. And our work at that time was involved in supporting deaf, blind, and hard of hearing individuals to receive employment, to gain employment through job evaluations, job placement, and time-limited short-term job coaching services. We knew that it was imperative to add ongoing long-term support and to serve people throughout the state of Minnesota, especially in greater Minnesota, because at the time we were only working in the Twin Cities area. We wanted to be able to expand our services and serve more community members. With the assistance of Mary Hartnett, who was the director of the commission at that time, we were able to successfully lobby the legislature, the state legislature, for funding, and received an increase of funding for employment services and capacity in order to serve more people throughout the state of Minnesota. It was a wonderful experience. The legislatures on both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans, supported our bill. They heard our testimony from employers, employees, and what was most fun for me was the MEC staff. They had never experienced that type of engagement before. And with our encouragement, they were able to successfully tell their story about how employment supports had helped people gain and retain employment. I found so much joy in watching and viewing those individuals come to the House and Senate committee hearings to testify. And I truly value those memories. During that time, we also established Lobby Day. And that was truly the first time that had happened for deaf and hard of hearing individuals within our community to be able to learn about the legislative process. And Lobby Day brought people together from all over the state, students and teachers, providers, legislators themselves would be in attendance, and we would be able to recognize and provide awards for people and their volunteer efforts. So I'm very proud of the work we did during that time in establishing the first Lobby Day. Minnesota has always been on the forefront of disability advocacy work, and we have done wonderful work. I'm very proud to be a part of this community. Again, a hearty congratulations to 36 years, and thank you for the honor of serving on the commission, and I wish you the best going forward.
Hello, my name is Quang Nguyen. This is my name sign. I was born in South Vietnam. My family escaped together in 1975 during the fall of Saigon for our freedom. We moved here and settled in Minnesota. We became U.S. citizens. I served on MNCDHH's board as an at-large member in 2005. 1 year later, I was in a bicycle accident. I was brought to the hospital and stayed for 41 days. The hospital provided ASL interpreters for up to 11 hours total during those 41 days, which was insufficient. My wife asked for interpreters, but her requests were brushed off despite my rights to equal access. My wife and I were not sure if we should sue the hospital or not. We hesitated because my wife worked full-time for the same hospital where I was a patient. I didn't want my wife to risk losing her job, so it was a conflict of interest. But wait a minute. What happened to people who were patients before me? Why did no one sue that hospital before? Obviously, the hospital system was appalling and dismissive to our rights for equal access. I learned through an advocate that they've already informed the scheduling coordinator for interpreting services at the hospital that they were not meeting their previous patients' needs for ASL interpreting and their rights. For clarification, I do not know this deaf Asian patients personally, their background or their name, because of confidentiality. But I had the right to know the scheduling coordinator's name for interpreting services. I learned that the scheduling coordinator was a male and had a Vietnamese name like mine. I realized no wonder the hospital scheduling coordinator took advantage of this deaf Asian patient's fear of filing a complaint. In general, a scheduling coordinator who is Vietnamese would be familiar with Asian culture. Filing a lawsuit or a complaint is taboo. But the hospital staff didn't know my background. I knew my rights from serving as a board member for MNCDHH. What was stopping me was my concern for my wife's job. We prayed for a sign from God. A few days later, I was watching the TV news when I saw the news story covering Douglas Ball's bad experience with police brutality and a violent arrest. He had his rights to equal access taken away. My wife and I looked at each other and agreed we should move forward with filing a complaint against the hospital with God's guidance for courage. The lawyer reviewed our case and accepted us as clients for suing the hospital. The hospital responded quickly and changed their system to provide better equal access. MNCDHH was happy to work with us and created healthcare videos to improve the deaf community's quality of life and to know their rights. Come and support MNCDHH to help make your case for success. Thank you for listening.
Wow, I'm inspired by all the stories that were shared, and I know that there are more stories that we did not have enough time to cover. Let's continue to work together and make a difference. I'm looking forward to the next 36 years. Hello, I'm Dr. Darlene Zangara, Executive Director at the Minnesota Commission of the Deaf, Deafblind, and Hard of Hearing, MNCDHH. Today, I will be asking past MNCDHH leaders about their experience and thoughts. Welcome. Please share your name, your role at the Commission, and what years you served at the Commission.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kurt Mitchka. And while I was with the commission, I was the director of the commission. And I worked with the commission from approximately 1988 or 89 to 96 or 97.
Hello to everyone. Thank you for inviting me to serve on this panel today. I'm very honored to be here. My name is Mike Cashman. And I began with the commission as the deputy director in the early 1990s. And I served until the early 2000s for about 8 years in total. I was asked by Dwight Maxa, who was the former director of the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services Division at the time, and who worked with Kurt Michka, to join the commission and work with Kurt. And I was very happy to serve in that capacity.
I'm Mary Hartnett. Was the executive director of the commission from 2020 until 2019, and it's an honor to be here today. And it's great to see Kurt and Mike.
What are some of your favorite accomplishments during your time at the commission?
I thought about this long and hard, and it was difficult because it was so long ago. But I think I came up with a few things. First, I think this is while I was the director of the commission, we worked to get passed in the legislature new requirements for sign language interpreters, so that all interpreters, I don't remember what they had to accomplish, but it was for school interpreters and interpreters every place else. And it was very controversial, and yeah, it was a lot of fun, but it was also very, very difficult. And the work on it continued until after I left. I think Mary worked on it. Possibly other people have worked on it. I'm not sure. So that was one thing. Another thing I always enjoyed was people who came to me and said, you know, Kurt, I recently had a meeting with my doctor, and my doctor would not provide a sign language interpreter. Or I had a meeting with a government official, and the guy or the woman would not provide an interpreter. So I would work on those kind of situations because of the law that says that they have to provide interpreters. And I always enjoyed doing that kind of work. Took me back to when I was an attorney and had the opportunity to do that also. But since the law was enacted, I was able to work on it with that. So that was always, it was always a great thing to work on. And third, I think the thing that brought me a lot of satisfaction was working with deaf and hard of hearing and deafblind people in terms of how to work effectively with legislative advocacy, how to go and talk to their legislators about different issues, and how to testify during hearings. And it was always, it was always a challenge, but it was a lot of great work and interesting work. I loved it a lot. So those are three things that I could think of.
As Kurt mentioned, there were too numerous to count, but I will just briefly highlight a few. The first being that it was a thrill to establish Lobby Day for deaf and hard of hearing, individuals at the state capitol. That was really a highlight of our work and our work with the commission, and that has continued until this day. Another highlight, I apologize, I'm just referring to my notes, is the various projects that we completed. And one that is always looked back on fondly was the health department, and specifically addressing issues in hospitals with access and issues that were critical to the nature of the community. And what we did at the time and what we accomplished then and what we were able to ensure that our hospitals and clinics and health facilities were more accessible to the deaf, deafblind, and hard of hearing community that still benefits our community today. And people from all over the nation still to this day tell us that we have a wonderful healthcare system in terms of providing interpreters and medical access. And so I'm very happy with the work we did in that regard. Another important piece of work that we did was that Kurt and I often traveled throughout the state. And we really crisscrossed the state to meet with community members and to discuss legislative priorities. We would travel throughout the state. Sometimes I was solo, sometimes Kurt and I would go together, and we would physically make a list. We didn't have iPads at the time, so we would bring actual paper and have them throughout the room on the walls for community members to be engaged and to outline their priorities for the legislative agenda. And it was that sense of empowerment and empowering the community to be actively engaged in the legislative process that was so important. And once we received that information, we would take those Post-it notes, and Kurt and I and others in the office, and whatever, my office, his, other empty rooms, we would take a look at all of that information and go through and dwindle it down and really create our priority list of what we were going to do, and then bring it forward to the board to get the approvals that we needed in order to be deciding what we needed to do for that year ahead. And that was fun, and it also gave us the opportunity to really sit down with legislators, Republicans and Democrats, independents across the aisle, to work together with them. And a lot of those legislators had not met a deaf person before. And so that was a big part of the work that we did. And that was an important part for them to understand that deaf people are involved in the community and certainly need to be involved in this process, and that deaf, blind, and hard of hearing individuals are present in our constituents. The fourth project, one of the last projects that we did before I left the commission, was also noteworthy. And that was, we did a research into the correctional system throughout Minnesota, statewide, and the accessibility within those correctional facilities. And that was, again, throughout the state, and and we met with many wardens and really assessed and reviewed their accessibility and the policies that they had in place. And that was a very positive experience for me.
Well, my favorite accomplishments are the relationships that we built and expanded over the years that I was there, building upon the great work that Kurt and Mike did. We just were able to reach out and engage more people of color, researchers, policy and employment, education and health and technology experts, and other disability groups and legislators. And we engaged a lot of those people into the development of three separate 5 to 6 year strategic plans that set very long range goals that many people said we would never be able to accomplish. But the community really had faith, and that faith built over time. And we built on the education programs that Mike and Kurt had put together on teaching people how to meet with their legislators, and created online learning experiences for making your case, We did in-person and online training. We did a lot of training on how to vote and try to make it really just show the importance of voting, and then establish more relationships with more people, with their legislators. We then, through that, expanded the work of the commission, and legislators were more willing to invest in the commission, and we were able to expand our budget from about $60,000 to well over $1 million, and build an incredible, talented team of staff that really support that work to this day, and recruit an even more diverse group of commission members who really keep that vision alive. The legislation that I feel most excited about, and I loved every one of them because every one of them was a story that somebody came to us telling their story about how they were harmed or how they had barriers to education or employment and so many different issues. And we were able to then get legislation passed that remedied that. But the hearing screening for kids, for babies at birth, and providing those babies with the supports that they needed, including sign language in the home through deaf mentors, a hearing aid loaner bank, unbiased information to parents on communication and education, and then a technology accessibility bill that provides technology standards that requires that all online content be accessible, including videos. The Education Collaborative Plan that measures outcomes for kids and follows the data, that brought over 60 groups together around the state to create kind of a vision for the future and how to improve outcomes for kids. And the increased funds for deafblind individuals and families, an executive order on increasing employment for people with disabilities, including people that are deaf, deafblind, and hard of hearing. And those are some of my favorite things, but just expanding and getting people excited about voting, about meeting with their legislators, about really, empowering the community to show there's no limit to what they can do. So.
Fantastic. What are some common misconceptions that people in general have about people who are deaf, deafblind, and hard of hearing? How can the commission address these misconceptions?
This was a tough thing for me to think about because I'm not deaf or hard of hearing or deafblind. I think one of the greatest misconceptions that people have is that people with those disabilities somehow have less intelligence, that they aren't as smart as everybody else, that they lack understanding of what's going on in the world. And while that may be true to a small extent when interpreters are not available, basically my experience is that the commission is great in showing how deaf and hard of hearing and deafblind people are incredibly intelligent, very, very smart, very, very capable, very, very able. And the work that the commission does is one way to demonstrate that. I think it's just remarkable in doing that. So, yeah.
That's an interesting question. I would say that in sitting down with legislatures, often individuals, realize that they're human just like us. And they have needs just as the deaf community, the deafblind community, and the hard of hearing community has needs. And that those needs are often misunderstood. I'll give you an example of a situation. There was a deafblind individual who needed to meet with their legislator. And we worked it out for them to go to the person's office for that meeting. And the legislator sat down and thought they were going to move along quickly. And that was not the case. The person stated, I need you to, if you don't mind, close the blinds in your office. And if you could just adjust your chair to the left to ensure that I can see you. And it really caught the person off guard, and they had to make these adjustments within their office. And they thought that this was just going to be a quick meeting, but there were many issues for that deafblind person in order to have their accommodations met that they needed to work out before the meeting. And that was paramount, that it needed to be hands-on, and they really needed to be able to meet this person's needs. So that being said, oftentimes legislators look at deaf, deafblind, and hard of hearing people within the community, and they don't necessarily see them on a daily basis. And so there are a lot of misconceptions that we always need to continue to work on. We can't just assume that everyone knows, because unfortunately, as we know, people don't, and there's that turnover and new players are in the mix. And so we always need to continually be training legislators and be aware of those things.
First, I think Mike expressed it beautifully. But I think some of the misconceptions are that all deaf people sign, all hard of hearing people sign, that everybody uses the same communication, the same language or the same communication modality, and that if you provide a sign language interpreter that provides full access for all deafblind people, all deaf people, and hard of hearing people. So that was just a communication access issue. And then I think, again, just what can the commission do to advocate and continue to say what the communication access issues need to be. It's become more normalized now at this point to have the governor has a sign language interpreter at all of his press conferences. The President of the United States now does too. It's, just by continue to advocate and try to integrate that into the structure of all of the work plans that everybody has, that their communication plans include all of these different pieces, and just institutionalize and put, instead of outside advocacy, to have it be part of the press list that goes off the checklist that says all of these people will be in the room. How do we make sure that everybody gets that information? So.
How has life for deaf, deafblind, and hard of hearing Minnesotans changed over the last 36 years?
Very good question. Thing that came to my mind immediately was that those people, deaf, deafblind, hard of hearing people, have a lot more access to day-to-day information than they had long ago, because of requirements for sign language interpreters, for video, for a lot of different means of conveying information to people. There's just a lot more access to that information. And I think it's a great thing. So that's the primary thing that I would say. Thought about it further. They just have more opportunities to do a whole lot of stuff that they couldn't do before, because it wasn't communicationally accessible. So I think there's more and more areas that will open up as communication gets better for deaf, deafblind, and hard of hearing people to be able to participate in.
Life has definitely changed. We are certainly better off today than we were 36 years ago. Technology, for one, continues to this day. We have more communication access than we've ever had. I mean, using Zoom as we are today, 36 years ago, you would physically have to be in person in order to meet with someone and interact. You know, snow, rain, hail, or otherwise, you would be driving to meet with a person. And today, if there's a conflict, we're able to use Zoom as we're doing today. And it's just, technology has been a wonderful asset to our community. I would also state that other important things that I've mentioned, Kurt, as he mentioned, we really started the structure and the foundation that we needed and set that direction for the work to happen when we were there during our tenure, and that has really persisted into this day. So we got the commission off the ground running with Kurt and the board early on, and that has continued until this day and has made a big difference.
The ADA didn't pass until 1990. So that made a sea change for all people with disabilities, and especially for deaf, blind, and hard of hearing people. In 1985, I used to work, actually helped run the relay service for the state, but in 1985, deaf people could only communicate with other deaf people using a TTY to a TTY. And if they wanted to make a phone call to a hearing person, they had to call the United Way or their relatives to communicate. So the lack of access was not even imaginable to this day. And then when the telephone relay came in, people couldn't imagine another level of technology. But today, the advancement in technology combined with the ADA has just made it easier for deaf, blind, and hard of hearing people to be engaged citizens. And there is no limit to how much they can advocate and be engaged in the workplace, in employment, etc. I mean, there's still a lot of discrimination that occurs, and some of it is because of lack of access to communication, but it has been dramatic, that change over time. So I would say that's the biggest one, and that's led to all of the other changes. But the foundation for the big significant shift, I think, was the passage of the ADA.
Last question, Kurt. What kind of issues do you think the commission should address in the future?
Was a question that was often asked of me while I was the director. And my response was often, depends upon what deaf and deafblind and hard of hearing people need and want. It's not me or somebody else on the commission making that decision for people, but it's really based upon what do people want and need. People may say, well, they don't know. They don't know what they want and need. Well, I disagree with that. And if need be, it's useful to put in front of them different options for things that they might want to pick and choose so that they can have a choice in that. And for me, that's okay, as long as they're not committed to picking one of those things. But if those kind of ideas can be provided as ideas, get people thinking, I think it's a great idea.
I'm sure that there is a lot of work yet to be done within our community, and that takes all of us to really dive into that work. And with the leadership we have within the commission, I think we are in very good shape to go forward. I would like to see in the future the commission focusing on education and how we are doing with our deaf children in the K through 12 setting. I believe that needs to be assessed? What are the graduation rates? What are the rates in terms of employment within Minnesota? If we are talking about a critical mass and critical mass learning, what does that look like? School, are we talking about deaf schools and boarding schools being smaller in number? Deaf-blind individuals, hard of hearing individuals, are they mainstreamed in public school settings? Perhaps we need a survey to assess how we're doing. And what are the pay rates that deaf individuals are receiving, and what are the graduation rates? Maybe that's already in progress and maybe we already have the answers. I'm not familiar with that at this time, but from my perspective, I would say that the commission should look into that or needs to partner with the educational system. And of course, the community is a critical player within that. I would say that the commission should be more involved with the community going forward. The way I look at it is that Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services Division, as it was established in the 1980s, was working on behalf of the deaf community and for culturally deaf people. And we're working to, for those boarding or residential schools. And of course, that list has expanded and expanded as time has gone on. And then later at that time, there was a Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services Division, which 5 years down the road, the commission was established. So I think it's important to keep in mind how that happened, that it really was community-based from the beginning. And we can't ignore the community. They must be an integral part of our process as stakeholders. And we need to be reaching out to experts within the community who exist all over our community and truly partnering and emboldening the community to work with the commission and the deaf, deafblind, and hard of hearing community members together, and specifically focusing on education. Are we doing well? Is there more work to be done in that arena? And again, that would be from K-12 and in post-secondary settings and graduate settings. I think that that is something that would be critical to look at as a project going forward.
Well, I think we're at a pivotal time right now with a reckoning in our country, and to make sure that whatever is done, that we're doing it, that all of our organizations need to be anti-racist organizations, and the intersectionality of race and disability and race and deaf, blind, and hard of hearing, and making sure that we have, institutions that are inclusive, that are fair, and then push that out to state agencies. So it's how the work is done. And then for the specific issues, the commission was led by and started by a meeting initiated by deaf leaders back in the 1980s with Governor Perkovich. And they fought, and it's the reason why we are here today. So to just the wisdom lies from the group, from the community, and by continuing to engage in the strategic planning process and developing those goals, what the commission needs to do and what it should be in the future will come from the community.
Kurt, Mike, and Mary, thank you so much for joining us today. I enjoyed talking with you and learning from your experience. Thank you for all the great work you have done advocating with the 20% of Minnesotans who are deaf, blind, and hard of hearing.